Hey everyone, welcome to Midnight Mystic Stories. I noticed a lot of you who are watching and enjoying the content aren't subscribed yet. If you love spine-chilling stories, creepy encounters, and unexplained mysteries, make sure to subscribe and turn on the notification bell. It really helps the channel grow and helps us keep bringing more of the content you love. And be sure to comment below where you are tuning in from. Thank you and enjoy the video. Okay, so this happened last year. And honestly, I still get a shiver down my spine thinking about it. I was on Hinge, swiping through the endless parade of guys holding fish or posing with their dogs. You know the drill. I wasn't looking for anything super serious, just someone to grab drinks with. Maybe go on a hike, the usual dating app stuff. Then I matched with Liam. Liam was different. His profile wasn't the typical curated perfection you usually see. His photos were candid, a little blurry, like they were taken on the fly. One was of him playing guitar on a porch, another of him hiking a trail with his back to the camera, and a third of him laughing with friends at a bonfire. His bio was short and sweet. Enjoys good music, good conversation, and getting lost in the woods. Let's explore. It felt genuine, not like he was trying too hard. We started chatting, and the conversation flowed so easily. He wasn't pushy or overly complimentary, just genuinely interested in getting to know me. We talked about our favorite bands, our dream travel destinations, and our most embarrassing childhood memories. He was funny, intelligent, and surprisingly insightful. After a few days of texting, he asked if I wanted to meet up for coffee. I was hesitant at first. I'd had my fair share of dating app disasters, but something about Liam felt different. I decided to trust my gut, or at least what I thought was my gut. We met at a small cafe downtown. He was even more attractive in person, tall, with kind eyes and a warm smile. The coffee date went great. We talked for hours, laughing and sharing stories. There was a definite spark between us. He walked me back to my car, and we hugged goodbye. I felt a rush of excitement. Maybe, just maybe, I had finally found someone worth pursuing. We went on a second date a few days later, a hike in a nearby state park. It was a beautiful day, and we spent the afternoon exploring the trails, talking and laughing. He seemed to know a lot about the woods, pointing out different plants and animal tracks. He was also surprisingly strong, helping me over some tricky spots on the trail. But as the hike went on, I started noticing little things that made me uneasy. He kept steering us off the main path, deeper into the woods. When I questioned it, he'd just smile and say he knew a secret spot with an amazing view. The view was nice, sure, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we were getting further and further away from civilization. Then there was the way he talked about nature. It wasn't just admiration. It was almost possessive. He talked about the woods like they were his own personal sanctuary, a place where he could escape from the world. He mentioned that he often went out there alone for days at a time, camping and disconnecting from technology. Again, not necessarily red flags, but the way he said it gave me a weird vibe. When we finally made it back to the main trail, I felt a wave of relief. We grabbed dinner at a local diner, but my unease lingered. He started asking me personal questions about my living situation, my work schedule, and my relationship with my family. He wanted to know if I lived alone, if I had any roommates, and how often my parents called. He wasn't aggressive about it, but the questions felt probing, like he was gathering information. I tried to deflect, but he was persistent, steering the conversation back to my personal life. Later that night, after he dropped me off at my apartment, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. My gut was screaming at me, but I couldn't pinpoint exactly what was wrong. I chalked it up to nerves and tried to reassure myself that I was just overthinking things. Big mistake. The next day, I got a text from Liam. Had a great time yesterday. Let's do it again soon. Maybe this time we can go camping in my secret spot. I hesitated. Part of me wanted to see him again, to give him another chance. But the other part of me, the part that was screaming danger, told me to run far, far away. I ignored my gut again. I told him I was busy that weekend, but suggested we grab drinks next week. He seemed disappointed, but agreed. Over the next few days, he texted me constantly, sending me photos of the woods, sharing stories about his adventures, and asking me more personal questions. The more he texted, the more uneasy I felt. I started doing some digging online. I couldn't find much about him. No social media profiles, no online presence whatsoever. It was like he didn't exist before he created his Hinge profile. That's when the alarm bells really started ringing. I decided to cancel our next date. I texted him a vague excuse, saying something came up. He responded immediately, asking what happened and if everything was okay. I told him it was nothing serious, but that I needed to reschedule. He didn't take it well. He started sending me a barrage of texts, demanding to know why I was canceling and accusing me of playing games. His tone shifted from charming to aggressive. "What's wrong? Are you seeing someone else? I thought we had something special." I tried to remain calm, telling him that I just needed some space, but he wouldn't let it go. He started calling me, leaving me voicemails, even sending me messages on other social media platforms. I blocked him on everything, but he kept finding ways to contact me. It was like he was obsessed. Things escalated quickly. One night, I came home from work and found a note taped to my door. It was a photo of me hiking in the woods with Liam, circled in red ink. The words "I see you" were scrawled across the bottom. I froze. I knew it was him. He was stalking me. I called the police, but they said there wasn't much they could do without more evidence. They advised me to get a restraining order, which I immediately did. For weeks, I lived in fear. I changed my locks, installed security cameras, and asked my friend to stay with me. I was constantly looking over my shoulder, terrified that Liam would show up. Thankfully, he never did. The restraining order seemed to work, or maybe he just moved on to another victim. I'll never know. To this day, I still get anxious when I think about Liam. I learned a valuable lesson, though. Always trust your gut. If something feels off, it probably is. Don't ignore those warning signs, no matter how charming or persuasive someone may seem. Trust your instincts, protect yourself, and don't be afraid to walk away from a potentially dangerous situation. It could save your life. I deleted Hinge and every other dating app one had. I haven't been on a date since. I don't know if I ever will be again. I'm still trying to process everything that happened. It was a terrifying experience, and it changed the way I view the world. I am much more cautious now, and I always listen to my gut. I only wish I had listened to it sooner. If you are using any apps or going out, always let someone know where you are and who you are with. So this is my story, and trust me, it's one I wish I could erase from my memory. I'm putting it out there as a warning, especially for anyone who's out there swiping and tapping on Hinge, thinking you know what you're getting into. You don't. You absolutely don't. I was in a rut, post-breakup, bored, and convinced that the perfect guy was just a carefully curated profile away. Hinge was my app of choice. Seemed a little more refined than the others. Less hookup why, more let's grab coffee and talk about our favorite podcasts kind of vibe. That's what I wanted, or at least, what I told myself I wanted. I matched with this guy named Alex. His profile was normal, maybe a little too normal. Decent-looking photos, hiking, hanging out with friends, one of him volunteering at an animal shelter. His prompts were generic but inoffensive. Something about loving a good craft beer and wanting to travel the world. Nothing that screamed serial killer. You know, our initial chats were fine. Polite, a little flirty, the usual getting-to-know-you questions. He seemed genuinely interested in my life, my job, my hobbies. He even remembered details I'd mentioned in previous conversations, which, let's be honest, is a low bar these days, but still appreciated. We decided to meet for drinks after about a week of chatting. He suggested this bar near my apartment, which was convenient. Looking back, maybe that should have been a red flag. Too eager? Too close? I don't know. I was just excited to get out of the house. The date itself was okay. He was a little more reserved in person than he'd been online. Less witty banter, more just listening. Which, again, isn't necessarily a bad thing, but it felt a little off. Like he was studying me, analyzing my reactions. He asked a lot of questions about my apartment, how long I'd lived there, if I had roommates, what my security setup was like. I brushed it off as normal conversation, but now, replaying it in my head, it feels calculated. We ended the date with a polite hug and a promise to do it again sometime. I wasn't blown away, but I wasn't completely turned off either. He texted me later that night, saying he had a great time and wanted to see me again. I said sure, figuring I had nothing to lose. That's where things started to get weird. He started texting me constantly, like all day, every day. If I didn't respond within a few minutes, he'd send another message, asking if I was okay, if I was mad at him, if I was ignoring him. It was suffocating. I tried to gently pull back, telling him I was busy with work, but he didn't seem to get the hint. He'd show up at my office unannounced, bringing me coffee or lunch. He'd wait for me outside my gym, wanting to walk me home. It was becoming increasingly clear that his initial interest had morphed into something obsessive. I started avoiding him, ignoring his texts, dodging his calls, taking different routes home from work. I even considered changing my number, but I didn't want to seem like I was overreacting. One evening, I came home from work to find a package on my doorstep. It was a small, wrapped gift. I didn't recognize the handwriting on the tag. I hesitated before bringing it inside. I opened it carefully, half expecting it to explode or something. Inside was a framed photo of me. It was a picture I posted on Instagram months ago, of me hiking in the mountains. But someone had clearly been watching me. This photo was taken without my knowledge. I was terrified. This wasn't just weird, it was stalking. I immediately called the police. They took the photo as evidence and filed a report, but they said there wasn't much they could do unless he actually threatened me or physically harmed me. They advised me to get a restraining order, but that required me to have proof of harassment, which, apparently, constant texting and showing up unannounced didn't qualify as. I felt helpless. I knew I was being stalked, but the police couldn't do anything to protect me. I was on my own. I started sleeping with a baseball bat next to my bed. I installed extra locks on my doors and windows. I told my neighbors to keep an eye out for anything suspicious. I was living in a constant state of fear. One night, I woke up to a noise outside my window. It sounded like someone was tapping on the glass. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. I grabbed the baseball bat and slowly crept towards the window. I peeked through the blinds. Alex was standing outside, staring up at my window. He was holding a bouquet of flowers. I screamed. He didn't react. He just stood there, smiling, his eyes fixated on mine. I called the police again, hysterically telling them what was happening. They arrived within minutes and apprehended him. This time, they had enough evidence to arrest him. The framed photo, the constant harassment, the fact that he was standing outside my window in the middle of the night. It all added up. He was charged with stalking and harassment, and eventually, a restraining order was issued. I felt a little safer, but the fear never really went away. The trial was a nightmare. He pleaded not guilty, claiming he was just trying to show me how much he cared. He painted me as a liar, saying I was exaggerating his behavior, but the evidence was overwhelming, and the jury found him guilty. He was sentenced to a year in jail and ordered to stay away from me for the rest of his life. It's been 2 years since the trial, and I still have nightmares about Alex. I still jump at every unexpected noise. I still check my locks multiple times before bed. I haven't used Hinge or any dating app since. The experience scarred me. It made me realize how easily someone can manipulate you online, how quickly a seemingly harmless connection can turn into a terrifying obsession. So, if you're out there swiping and tapping, please be careful. Don't be naive. Don't ignore the red flags. Trust your gut. And remember, you never really know who's on the other side of that screen. Your life might depend on it. I got lucky to not be injured. Now I live in fear and regret. And honestly, that refined Hinge experience? Total BS. Crazy is crazy, no matter what app you meet them on. Consider this my cautionary tale, purchased with way too much anxiety. I'll never forget the feeling of dread when I opened the Hinge app that morning. It wasn't the usual Sunday scaries kind of dread, the oh God, back to work tomorrow feeling. This was deeper, colder, like the chilling premonition you get right before a disaster. Maybe it was the unusually gray sky outside my window. Maybe it was the fact that I'd had a weird dream about being chased through a cornfield, but something just felt profoundly off. I'd been using Hinge for a solid year at that point, a pretty standard part of my post-grad, single-in-the-city routine. Swipe, match, chat, maybe a date or two, then rinse and repeat. It wasn't exactly fulfilling, but it filled the time and occasionally led to a decent conversation. I wasn't necessarily looking for the one, just someone interesting to grab a drink with. That morning, though, the app felt different. The usual cheerful pink interface seemed sickly somehow. The curated profiles staring back at me with an almost accusatory gaze. I scrolled through my matches, most of whom I hadn't spoken to in weeks, a digital graveyard of fleeting connections. Then I saw it, a new message from Liam. Liam and I had matched about a week prior. His profile was interesting. He had a brooding intensity in his photos, All black and white shots of him looking pensive in various urban landscapes. His prompts were equally enigmatic. The most spontaneous thing I've ever done, followed by, is a secret. And I'm looking for someone who, finished with, understands the darkness. Normally, I'd swipe left on someone that overtly mysterious. I tend to go for the guys who seem genuinely happy to be holding a fish in their profile picture, the ones who list hiking and craft beer as their top interests. But something about Liam intrigued me. Maybe it was the aforementioned weird dream. Maybe it was just boredom, but I decided to throw caution to the wind and send him a message. We chatted for a few days, the conversations equally strange and compelling. He asked me about my fears, my regrets, my darkest thoughts. He seemed genuinely interested in peeling back the layers of my carefully constructed persona and seeing the raw, vulnerable core beneath. It was unnerving, but also kind of exciting. I found myself revealing things to him that I wouldn't normally tell anyone, secrets I'd kept buried deep inside for years. We made plans to meet for coffee that Friday. I was hesitant, but he was insistent, and I found myself strangely compelled to say yes. But then, on Thursday night, he unmatched me. Poof. Gone. Vanished from my Hinge universe. I figured it was a classic case of cold feet, a last-minute realization that he wasn't as interested as he'd seemed. I was a little disappointed, but also relieved. Something about him had felt off. Which brings me back to that Sunday morning, and the message. It wasn't a message from Hinge itself, not a notification about a new match or a reminder to update my profile. It was a direct message from Liam. But it wasn't a normal message. It was just a single image. A picture of me, sitting at my desk, in my apartment, right now. My blood ran cold. I froze, staring at the image on my phone, trying to process what I was seeing. It was definitely me. I could see the messy bun on top of my head, the oversized sweatshirt I was wearing, the half-empty coffee mug on my desk. And it was definitely my apartment. The distinctive floral wallpaper, the mismatched furniture, the framed posters on the wall, all undeniably mine. But how? My apartment was on the 3rd floor, with no balcony or fire escape. The windows were closed and locked. I hadn't let anyone in for days. And yet, somehow, Liam had managed to take a picture of me, sitting in my own home, without my knowledge. The dread intensified, morphing into a full-blown panic attack. I started to tremble, my breath coming in short, shallow gasps. I frantically scanned the room, looking for any sign of forced entry, any indication that someone had been inside. But everything seemed normal. Too normal. I called the police. They arrived within minutes, 2 uniformed officers who seemed skeptical of my story. They searched the apartment, checked the locks, and interviewed me about Liam. They took the photo as evidence, but they seemed to think it was some kind of elaborate prank, a twisted game gone too far. They advised me to stay with a friend for a few days, to change my passwords, and to be more careful about what I shared online. They promised to investigate, but I could tell they didn't take it seriously. To them, it was just another case of online harassment, a fleeting moment of discomfort that would soon fade away. But it didn't fade away. I stayed with my friend Sarah for a week, barely sleeping, constantly checking the locks, jumping at every sound. I changed my passwords, deleted my social media accounts, and swore off online dating forever. I felt like I was being watched, like Liam was still out there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for his next move. The police investigation yielded nothing. They couldn't find any trace of Liam, no record of his existence beyond his Hinge profile, which had been deleted. It was like he had vanished into thin air. Eventually, I moved back into my apartment, but I never felt safe again. I installed security cameras, reinforced the locks, and bought a baseball bat to keep by my bed. I tried to go back to my old routine, to pretend that everything was normal, but the fear was always there, a constant undercurrent of anxiety that I couldn't shake. Then, a few months later, it happened again. Another message, from an unknown number, another picture of me. This time, I was walking down the street, on my way to work. The picture was taken from across the street, zoomed in on my face. The caption read, "I see you." I lost it. I completely broke down. I quit my job, packed my bags, and moved back in with my parents in my small hometown, a place I swore I'd never return to. I felt like I was running for my life, fleeing from an invisible enemy who was always one step ahead of me. I've been back home for almost a year now. I'm still terrified. I rarely leave the house, and I'm constantly looking over my shoulder, afraid that Liam will find me again. I know it sounds crazy, but I can't shake the feeling that he's out there, watching me, waiting for the right moment to strike. I don't know who Liam is, or what he wants. I don't know why he targeted me, or how he managed to take those pictures. All I know is that he's ruined my life. He's taken away my sense of security, my sense of freedom, my sense of self. I'll never forget the feeling of dread when I opened that Hinge app that morning. It was the beginning of a nightmare that I'm still living, a constant reminder that sometimes the greatest dangers come from the most unexpected places. The internet can be a scary place, and sometimes the person behind the profile isn't who they seem to be. And sometimes it is far more sinister than you can ever think possible. Okay, so I'm usually a pretty level-headed person. I consider myself rational, skeptical even. I don't jump to conclusions, and I definitely don't believe in stuff like ghosts or premonitions. But there was something about Mark from Hinge that set off every alarm bell in my head, even before we met in person. And I ignored them. Now I'm paying the price. I'd been on Hinge for a few months, the usual grind. Endless swiping, awkward conversations that fizzled out, the occasional okayish date that led nowhere. I wasn't desperate, but I was hoping to find someone decent, you know? Mark's profile was intriguing. His photos were all moody and artistic, black and white shots of him staring pensively into the distance. He looked like he was trying way too hard to be deep, but his prompts were funny. And we seemed to have a lot of the same interests: obscure indie bands, old movies, hiking. We matched, and the conversation flowed easily. He was witty and engaging, a good texter. He asked thoughtful questions and actually seemed interested in what I had to say. He avoided the usual cheesy pickup lines and never pressured me for anything. On paper, he was perfect, but there was this nagging feeling, this low-level hum of unease that I couldn't shake. Maybe it was the intensity of his messages. He'd text me at all hours, responding instantly to everything I sent. It was flattering at first, but it quickly started to feel suffocating. Or maybe it was the way he talked about his exes. He had a whole arsenal of stories about how they'd wronged him, how they'd never understood him, how they were all crazy. Classic red flag, I know, but I told myself everyone has baggage. He was also weirdly evasive about his job. He said he worked from home as a consultant, but he never specified what kind of consulting. I asked a few times, but he always dodged the question or changed the subject. I should have pressed him harder, but I didn't want to seem nosy. After a week of constant texting, he asked me out. I hesitated. That feeling in my gut was screaming at me to say no, to block him, to run far, far away. But I told myself I was being paranoid. I was judging him too quickly. He seemed nice, intelligent, and genuinely interested in me. I didn't want to let my anxieties ruin a potential connection. So I said yes. We agreed to meet for coffee at a local cafe. I sent the details to my best friend, Sarah, along with a picture of Mark. If I go missing, he's the prime suspect, I texted her, trying to make a joke out of my nervousness. She told me to trust my gut and to have an escape plan. I laughed it off, but I secretly appreciated her concern. The moment I saw him at the cafe, my stomach dropped. He looked different than his photos. Older somehow. His eyes were too intense, too focused. He was wearing a long, dark coat, even though it was a warm day. He reminded me of a character in a movie about a serial killer, but I couldn't place who. He greeted me with a hug that lingered a little too long. "It's so great to finally meet you," he said, his voice smooth and almost hypnotic. I forced a smile and tried to relax. We ordered our coffees, and the conversation started off okay. He asked me about my job, my hobbies, my family. He listened attentively, nodding and making eye contact. But then the questions started getting personal. He asked about my childhood, my fears, my insecurities. He wanted to know everything about me, and he wanted to know it now. It felt like an interrogation, not a date. He also kept steering the conversation back to his exes, rehashing their supposed betrayals and painting himself as the victim. I started to feel trapped. The cafe suddenly seemed small and claustrophobic. I wanted to leave, but I didn't want to be rude. I made an excuse about needing to use the restroom and went to the back of the cafe to call Sarah. "I'm freaking out," I whispered into the phone. "He's so weird. I want to leave, but I don't know how to get out of here." "Trust your gut," Sarah said firmly. "Make up an excuse. Say you have a family emergency. Just get out of there." I took a deep breath and thanked her. I went back to the table, my mind racing. "Mark," I said, trying to sound calm. "I'm so sorry, but I have to go. My sister just called. There's a family emergency." His face didn't change. He didn't seem surprised or concerned. "What's wrong?" he asked, his eyes boring into mine. I can't say." I stammered. "It's private, but I have to leave now." He nodded slowly. "Okay," he said. "I understand." He stood up and walked me to the door. As I was leaving, he grabbed my hand. "I had a really great time," he said, his voice low and husky. "I hope we can do this again soon." I pulled my hand away and mumbled something about being busy. I practically ran out of the cafe and didn't stop until I was safely inside my car. I locked the doors and took several deep breaths. I was shaking so badly I could barely drive. I blocked Mark on Hinge and deleted his number from my phone. I told Sarah everything that had happened, and she reassured me that I'd done the right thing. I tried to put the whole experience behind me, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd narrowly avoided something terrible. A few weeks later, I was scrolling through the local news website when I saw a familiar face. It was Mark. His real name was David Miller, and he was wanted by the police in connection with the disappearance of several women in the area. The article said that he had a history of stalking and harassing his ex-girlfriends, and that he was considered armed and dangerous. I felt like I was going to throw up. I had been on a date with a potential serial killer. If I hadn't listened to my gut, if I hadn't trusted my instincts, I could have been one of those missing women. It sends shivers down my spine just thinking about it. I went to the police and gave them everything I knew about Mark, or rather David. They thanked me for my help and told me that they were doing everything they could to find him. A few days later, they caught him trying to cross the border into Canada. He was eventually charged with multiple counts of kidnapping and murder. I testified at his trial, and seeing him in the courtroom, behind bars, was both terrifying and cathartic. I knew that I had done the right thing, not only for myself, but for the other women who had been victimized by him. The whole experience changed me. I'm more cautious now, more aware of my surroundings. I trust my instincts more than ever before, and I'll never ignore that nagging feeling in my gut again, because sometimes that feeling is the only thing that stands between you and something truly evil. Using dating apps can be dangerous, and I'm glad I got out with nothing but a story to tell. Trust your gut, no matter what. I guess that's how these things usually go. It all started, predictably enough, with a Hinge notification. It was a Friday night. I was bored, scrolling through the same rotation of faces, the same generic bios, the same curated highlight reels that we all pretend are real life. Then I saw her profile. Sarah. Her pictures were different, less polished, more genuine. One was a candid shot of her laughing with friends. Another was a close-up of her reading a book in a coffee shop. And the third was a landscape photo she'd taken on a hike. Her bio was simple: looking for someone to explore hidden gems with. It was enough to pique my interest. I sent her a like with a comment about the book she was reading, and to my surprise, she responded almost immediately. We started chatting, and the conversation flowed effortlessly. We talked about our shared love of hiking, our favorite books, our travel dreams. She seemed smart, funny, and down to earth. Everything I was looking for. After a few days of chatting, we decided to meet up. She suggested a local hiking trail that I'd never been to before. I was excited. It seemed like the perfect first date. The day of the hike was beautiful. The sun was shining, the birds were singing, and the air was crisp and clean. I arrived at the trailhead a few minutes early and waited for Sarah to show up. She arrived right on time, and she looked even more beautiful in person. She was wearing hiking boots, jeans, and a flannel shirt, and her hair was pulled back in a ponytail. She had a warm smile and a genuine laugh that made me feel instantly comfortable. We started hiking, and the conversation continued to flow as easily as it had online. We talked about our families, our jobs, and our hopes for the future. We laughed, we shared stories, and we connected on a deeper level than I had with anyone in a long time. The trail was scenic, winding through a dense forest with stunning views of the surrounding mountains. About halfway through the hike, we reached a secluded clearing with a small waterfall. It was the perfect spot for a break. We sat down on a large rock and ate our snacks, enjoying the peacefulness of the surroundings. As we were sitting there, Sarah told me she wanted to show me something. She said she had found this trail a couple of weeks ago and noticed something out of the ordinary. I asked her what it was, and she told me to follow her. She led me off the main trail, into a denser part of the forest. I hesitated for a moment. It felt like we were wandering into the unknown, but I trusted her. We walked for a few minutes, deeper and deeper into the woods, until we reached a small, overgrown clearing. In the center of the clearing was an old, abandoned cabin. It was dilapidated and falling apart, with boarded-up windows and a caved-in roof. It looked like it hadn't been inhabited in decades. I asked Sarah what was so special about the cabin. She said she wasn't sure, but she had a strange feeling about it. She said she felt drawn to it, like it was calling to her. I was skeptical, but I agreed to take a closer look. As we approached the cabin, I noticed something strange. There were symbols carved into the wooden walls. They looked ancient and unfamiliar, like some kind of forgotten language. I asked Sarah if she knew what they meant, but she said she had no idea. We walked around the cabin, examining the symbols. The air grew colder, and a sense of unease washed over me. I wanted to leave, but Sarah seemed transfixed. She kept staring at the symbols, as if trying to decipher their meaning. Suddenly, she gasped. She said she recognized one of the symbols. She had seen it in a book about ancient mythology. She said it was a symbol for a demon, a powerful entity that was said to inhabit abandoned places. I scoffed. I told her it was just a story, a legend, but she insisted that it was real. She said she could feel the demon's presence in the cabin. I tried to reason with her, but she wouldn't listen. She was convinced that something evil was lurking inside. Against my better judgment, I agreed to go inside the cabin with her. I didn't believe in demons, but I didn't want to leave her alone. We cautiously approached the front door and pushed it open. The door creaked and groaned as it swung inward, revealing a dark and musty interior. The air inside the cabin was thick and heavy, and it smelled like decay. We stepped inside, and I immediately felt a chill run down my spine. The cabin was small and cramped, with a single room filled with broken furniture and cobwebs. The walls were covered in the same strange symbols that we had seen outside. As we explored the cabin, Sarah became increasingly agitated. She kept muttering to herself, reciting words that I couldn't understand. Her eyes were wide and unfocused, and she seemed to be in a trance. I tried to snap her out of it, but she didn't respond. Suddenly, she stopped moving. She stood perfectly still, staring at a corner of the room. I asked her what she was looking at, but she didn't answer. I followed her gaze and saw something that made my blood run cold. In the corner of the room, there was a dark figure. It was tall and gaunt, with glowing red eyes and sharp, claw-like hands. It was the demon. I screamed and tried to run, but the demon blocked my path. It lunged at me, its claws outstretched. I braced myself for the impact, but it never came. Instead, the demon turned its attention to Sarah. It grabbed her by the neck and lifted her into the air. She struggled and gasped for breath, but the demon's grip was too strong. I watched in horror as the demon choked the life out of her. Her body went limp, and her eyes rolled back in her head. Then, the demon vanished, disappearing into thin air. I stood there, paralyzed with fear, staring at Sarah's lifeless body. I didn't know what to do. I wanted to call for help, but I couldn't move. I was trapped in a nightmare, and I couldn't wake up. Eventually, I managed to regain my composure. I stumbled out of the cabin and ran back to the main trail. I didn't stop running until I reached my car. I drove home as fast as I could, my mind racing with thoughts of what had just happened. I didn't know if I should call the police or try to forget everything I had seen. I was afraid that they wouldn't believe me, that they would think I was crazy. In the end, I decided to do nothing. I couldn't face the thought of reliving the experience, of explaining what had happened to Sarah. I knew that I would never be the same. The memory of that day, of the demon and Sarah's lifeless body, would haunt me forever. And it all started with a Hinge notification. I never imagined that swiping right could lead to such a horrific outcome. I deleted the app that night, and I haven't used it since. I'm too afraid of what I might find. Some connections are best left unmade. I still think about Sarah, about the potential we had, the what-ifs. Now there is just emptiness and dread. It is a weight that will never go away. That is my Hinge horror story. I never thought this would happen to me, but here I am, completely and utterly shaken by a Hinge experience that went from promising to terrifying in a way I never could have imagined. I'd been on Hinge for a while, cycling through the usual cast of characters. The guys who only post gym selfies. The ones who have clearly recycled the same 3 canned responses to every prompt. And the few genuinely interesting ones who, for whatever reason, never pan out. I was starting to feel like I was losing hope. Online dating felt like a chore, another box to check off in my endless quest for something. Then I matched with Liam. His profile was different. He wasn't conventionally attractive, but he had this incredibly kind face, a genuine smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes. His prompts weren't the typical cliches either. He wrote about his love for rescuing stray animals, his passion for learning new languages, and his weird obsession with obscure historical facts. It felt real, refreshing. We started chatting, and the conversations flowed effortlessly. He was witty, intelligent, and surprisingly vulnerable. He talked about his struggles with anxiety, his past heartbreaks, and his dreams for the future. I found myself opening up to him in ways I hadn't with anyone else on the app. After a week of nonstop messaging, we decided to meet for coffee. He suggested a small, independent bookstore cafe near my apartment. It was a perfect first date spot, cozy, quiet, and filled with the comforting aroma of old books and freshly brewed coffee. He was even more charming in person. He was a little awkward at first, but he quickly warmed up, and we spent hours talking, laughing, and connecting on a deeper level than I thought possible on a first date. I felt like I had known him for years. We ended the date with a hug and a promise to see each other again soon. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. We went on dates almost every night, to museums, art galleries, concerts, even a spontaneous road trip to a nearby national park. He introduced me to his friends, who were all equally quirky and welcoming. I felt like I had finally found my tribe, my place. I was falling hard, and I thought he was too. Then, the cracks started to appear. They were subtle at first, almost imperceptible. He started canceling plans at the last minute, citing work emergencies or family obligations. He became less responsive to my texts, taking hours, sometimes days, to reply. He seemed distant, preoccupied. When I asked him what was wrong, he brushed it off, saying he was just stressed and needed some space. I tried to be understanding, to give him the benefit of the doubt, but the nagging feeling in the back of my mind grew stronger with each passing day. Something was definitely off. One night, after a particularly strained dinner, I decided to confront him. We were walking back to my apartment, and the silence between us was deafening. I stopped him on the sidewalk, took his hand, and looked him in the eyes. "Liam, what's going on?" I asked, my voice trembling. "You've been acting so strange lately. Are you okay?" He avoided my gaze, shifting uncomfortably. "I'm fine," he said, his voice flat. "Just busy." "That's not true," I said, my voice rising. "You're not fine, and you're not just busy. Something is happening, and I deserve to know what it is." He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Okay, fine," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "There's something you need to know." He paused, taking a deep breath. I'm not who you think I am." My heart sank. I knew it. Something was wrong. Terribly wrong. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice barely audible. He looked up at me, his eyes filled with a mixture of fear and regret. "My name isn't Liam," he said. It's Daniel." I stared at him, my mind reeling. "Daniel," I repeated, my voice shaking. But everything you told me, it was all a lie." He nodded, tears welling up in his eyes. "I'm so sorry," he said. "I never meant for it to go this far." He went on to explain that he had created a fake profile on Hinge using someone else's pictures and information. He had been lonely and insecure, and he thought that by pretending to be someone else, he could finally find someone who would love him. He knew it was wrong, he said, but he couldn't stop himself. He had fallen in love with me, he claimed, and he was terrified of losing me. I was stunned, speechless. I couldn't believe that everything I thought I knew about him was a lie. The man I had fallen for didn't even exist. I felt betrayed, violated, and utterly foolish. I turned and ran, tears streaming down my face. I didn't stop running until I reached my apartment. I locked the door behind me and collapsed onto my bed, sobbing uncontrollably. I spent the next few days in a daze, unable to eat, sleep, or function. I replayed every moment of our relationship in my head, trying to make sense of it all. How could I have been so blind? How could I have fallen for such an elaborate lie? The worst part was the feeling of violation. He had invaded my life, my heart, my mind, under false pretenses. He had stolen my trust and left me feeling empty and broken. I eventually reported him to Hinge and blocked him on all social media platforms. I even considered going to the police, but I didn't have any concrete evidence of wrongdoing, and I didn't want to relive the experience. I tried to move on, to forget about him, but the memory of his deception haunted me. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had been targeted, manipulated, and emotionally abused. It took me a long time to trust anyone again, especially on dating apps. I still use Hinge occasionally, but I'm much more cautious now. I do my research, ask a lot of questions, and trust my gut. I learned a hard lesson about the dangers of online dating and the importance of verifying someone's identity. I never thought this would happen to me, but it did, and I'll never be the same. The experience has left me scarred, cynical, and forever wary of the people I meet online. I hope my story serves as a warning to others. Be careful who you trust, and always protect yourself. You never know who's hiding behind that carefully curated profile. I'd been on Hinge for a few months, swiping mostly out of boredom. I wasn't actively looking for anything serious, just someone to grab a drink with, maybe watch a movie, kill some time. The app was usually a wasteland of predictable profiles and recycled pickup lines. But then I matched with Liam. His profile was different, in a way that felt genuine. He wasn't trying too hard with the perfectly curated photos or the witty one-liners. His pictures were candid, showing him hiking, playing guitar, and laughing with friends. His prompts were thoughtful, revealing a guy who was curious about the world and seemed to genuinely enjoy life. We messaged back and forth for a week or so, and the conversation flowed easily. He was funny, intelligent, and surprisingly down-to-earth. We talked about everything from our favorite books to our worst travel experiences, and I found myself actually looking forward to his messages. Eventually, we decided to meet up for a drink. He suggested a small, out-of-the-way bar in my neighborhood, the kind of place that wasn't too loud or crowded, perfect for actually talking. I agreed, feeling a mix of excitement and nervous anticipation. I told a couple of my friends about the date, sent them his picture, and shared my location, just in case. It was a routine precaution, something I always did when meeting someone new from an app. When I arrived at the bar, Liam was already there, sitting at a table near the back. He looked even better in person than he did in his photos. He had kind eyes, a warm smile, and a relaxed demeanor that immediately put me at ease. We greeted each other with a hug, and I settled into the seat across from him. The first hour of the date was perfect. The conversation was easy and engaging. We talked about our jobs, our hobbies, and our families. He was a great listener, asking thoughtful questions and sharing his own experiences with honesty and vulnerability. I found myself laughing a lot, genuinely enjoying his company. He wasn't trying to impress me or put on an act. He was just being himself, and I liked him a lot. As the night wore on, we ordered another round of drinks, and the conversation started to shift. He began asking more personal questions, delving into my past relationships, my fears, and my insecurities. At first, I didn't think much of it. I figured he was just trying to get to know me better. But the questions became increasingly intense, almost probing. He asked about my childhood, my relationship with my parents, and whether I had any secrets I was hiding. I started to feel a little uncomfortable, but I brushed it off. Maybe he was just a deeply introspective person, I told myself. But then he started talking about himself, revealing a darker side that I hadn't seen before. He talked about his struggles with anxiety and depression, his feelings of isolation and loneliness. He described his past relationships as failures, blaming his exes for his unhappiness. He spoke with a bitterness and resentment that was unsettling. I tried to steer the conversation in a different direction, but he kept circling back to his pain, his anger, his sense of injustice. He started to rant about the world, about how unfair it was, how people were selfish and cruel. His voice grew louder, his eyes more intense. I could feel the energy in the bar shifting, people around us starting to notice. I excused myself to go to the restroom, needing a moment to collect myself. As I stood in front of the mirror, I tried to make sense of what was happening. Was this the same guy I'd been laughing and joking with just an hour ago? Had I missed some obvious warning signs? I splashed some water on my face, took a deep breath, and told myself to stay calm. When I returned to the table, Liam was still there, waiting for me. His expression was softer now, almost apologetic. He apologized for getting so intense, said he'd had a few too many drinks, and let his emotions get the better of him. I told him it was okay, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was deeply wrong. We finished our drinks in silence, the easy banter replaced by an awkward tension. When it was time to leave, he offered to walk me home. I hesitated, but I didn't want to make a scene. I agreed, hoping the walk would be uneventful. As we walked, he continued to apologize, saying he really liked me and didn't want to ruin things. He said he was just going through a tough time and needed someone to talk to. I listened politely, offering words of encouragement, but I kept my distance, both physically and emotionally. When we reached my apartment building, I thanked him for the date and said goodnight. He didn't try to kiss me or pressure me to invite him in. He just stood there, watching me as I unlocked the door. As I stepped inside, I turned back to wave goodbye. He was still standing there, a strange smile on his face. I closed the door and locked it, feeling a wave of relief wash over me. I couldn't explain it, but something about him felt off. I immediately texted my friends, letting them know I was home safe. I took a shower, changed into my pajamas, and tried to relax, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I checked all the windows and doors, making sure they were locked. I turned off the lights and crawled into bed, pulling the covers up to my chin, but I couldn't fall asleep. Every creak and groan of the building sounded like footsteps. Every shadow seemed to move. Around 3 a.m., I heard a noise outside my window. It sounded like someone was tapping on the glass. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. I slowly got out of bed and crept to the window, peeking through the blinds. Liam was standing on the sidewalk below, staring up at my window. He was holding a bouquet of flowers in one hand and a small, wrapped gift in the other. He smiled when he saw me, a chillingly wide and unnatural smile. I quickly ducked back, my mind racing. What was he doing here? How did he know where I lived? I grabbed my phone and dialed 911, my hands shaking. I whispered my address to the dispatcher, telling her that someone was outside my apartment, harassing me. As I waited for the police to arrive, I heard the tapping on the window again, louder this time. I peeked through the blinds again, and Liam was still there, his eyes fixed on my window. He mouthed something, but I couldn't make out what he was saying. Suddenly, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small object. It looked like a knife. He started scratching something into the sidewalk with the knife, his movements frantic and desperate. I gasped, realizing what he was doing. He was writing my name. The police arrived a few minutes later, sirens blaring. They apprehended Liam without incident, taking him into custody. I watched from my window as they led him away, the bouquet of flowers and the wrapped gift lying forgotten on the sidewalk. The next day, I filed a restraining order against Liam. I learned that he had a history of stalking and harassing women he'd met online. He'd been arrested several times before, but he always managed to slip through the cracks. I was lucky. I caught the red flags early enough to protect myself, but the experience left me shaken and traumatized. I deleted Hinge and swore off online dating for good. I still have nightmares about that night, about Liam standing outside my window, scratching my name into the sidewalk. It was supposed to be a routine meetup, a casual drink with someone I'd met online, but it turned into a terrifying reminder of the dangers that lurk beneath the surface, hidden behind a charming profile and a friendly smile. It made me question the very fabric of trust. It showed me how online dating is more than just something fun. It's a life-changing scenario that can turn your world upside down. I never saw him again, but I know he's out there somewhere, and it makes me sick to my stomach. Hinge is an online dating application where people are supposed to connect. But what is stopping people from connecting in dangerous ways? It's not worth it. I'm about to tell you something I've never told anyone. Not my best friend, not my therapist, no one. It's about my Hinge experience, and it still freaks me out to this day. I was pretty late to the dating app game. All my friends were swiping left and right for years, but I always resisted. I was more of a meet-cute at the coffee shop kind of romantic, even though that never actually happened. But then I went through a really rough breakup, and my friend convinced me that it was time to dip my toes in the digital dating pool. She swore Hinge was the classier app, the one for people looking for actual relationships, not just hookups. So, against my better judgment, I made a profile. It was awkward at first, figuring out what pictures to use, what prompts to answer, trying to sound witty and charming without seeming desperate. But eventually, I got the hang of it. I started matching with some decent-looking guys, having some halfway interesting conversations. Nothing earth-shattering, but it was a nice distraction from my post-breakup blues. Then I matched with Liam. His profile was different. He wasn't conventionally handsome, but he had this intense, brooding look in his pictures that I found strangely appealing. He had a longish, dark hair that always seemed to fall in his face, and these piercing blue eyes that looked like they could see right through you. His prompts were also more thoughtful than most. He wrote about his love for classic literature, his passion for hiking, and his belief in the importance of deep, meaningful connections. We started chatting, and I was immediately hooked. He was intelligent, articulate, and surprisingly funny. We talked about everything: our favorite books, our childhood memories, our hopes and dreams. He asked me questions that no one had ever asked me before, questions that made me really think about who I was and what I wanted out of life. It felt like we had known each other forever, even though we had never met in person. After a week of intense texting, he asked me out. We decided to meet at a small, independent bookstore in my neighborhood. It was the perfect date spot for two book lovers like us. I was so nervous that I almost canceled, but something about him compelled me to go. When I saw him waiting for me outside the bookstore, I was even more drawn to him than I had been in his pictures. He had this quiet confidence about him, this air of mystery that I couldn't quite put my finger on. We went inside, browsed the shelves, and talked for hours. It felt like we were the only two people in the world. We went on a few more dates after that, each one more magical than the last. We hiked in the mountains, explored hidden cafes, and even went to a poetry slam. I was completely smitten. I felt like I had finally found someone who truly understood me, someone who saw me for who I really was. But then, things started to get weird. It started small. He would say things that were a little too perceptive, things that made me wonder if he knew more about me than I had told him. He would mention details about my life that I was sure I hadn't shared, things that I had only thought about, never spoken aloud. One night, we were having dinner at my apartment, and I was telling him about a recurring dream I had been having since I was a child. It was a strange, nonsensical dream about being lost in a forest, surrounded by whispering trees. I had never told anyone about this dream before, not even my therapist. But as I was describing it to Liam, he started nodding, like he already knew what I was going to say. "I know that dream," he said softly. "I've had it too." I stared at him in disbelief. "What are you talking about?" "The forest," he said, his eyes fixed on mine. "The whispering trees. I know that place." I was freaked out. How could he possibly know about my dream? It was something so personal, so deeply buried in my subconscious. There was no way he could have guessed it. I tried to laugh it off, to chalk it up to coincidence, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. From that point on, I started noticing more and more strange things about Liam. He always seemed to be one step ahead of me, anticipating my thoughts and feelings before I even knew them myself. He would show up at places I was planning to go, even though I hadn't told him my plans. He would send me text messages that were eerily relevant to whatever I was thinking about at that moment. It was like he was inside my head. I started to feel like I was losing my mind. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't eat. I couldn't concentrate on anything. I was constantly on edge, waiting for the next strange thing to happen. I knew I had to do something, but I didn't know what. I was afraid to confront Liam, afraid of what he might say or do. One night, I decided to do some research. I Googled his name, hoping to find some answers. What I found was more terrifying than I could have ever imagined. It turned out that Liam wasn't who he said he was. His real name was David, and he had a long history of stalking and harassing women. He had been arrested multiple times for violating restraining orders, and he had even spent some time in a mental institution. The Hinge profile I saw, the charming, intelligent, brooding guy I fell for, it was all a lie. I was horrified. I felt like I had been living in a nightmare. I immediately blocked him on Hinge and changed my phone number. I was terrified that he would find me, that he would hurt me. I went to the police and told them everything, but they said there wasn't much they could do. He hadn't technically done anything illegal, and they couldn't arrest him without proof that he was a threat. I felt helpless. I knew I had to protect myself, but I didn't know how. I decided to move out of my apartment and go into hiding. I told my friends and family that I was going on a long trip, and I packed up my belongings and left town. I spent the next few months living in a small, secluded cabin in the mountains. I cut off all contact with the outside world and tried to rebuild my life. It was a difficult time, but I knew it was necessary. I needed to get away from Liam, to find a safe place where I could heal. Eventually, I started to feel like myself again. I began to write, to paint, to reconnect with the things that made me happy. I realized that I couldn't let Liam control my life. I had to take back my power, to reclaim my own identity. I eventually moved back to the city, but I never went back to my old apartment. I found a new place in a different neighborhood, and I made sure to take extra precautions to protect my safety. I installed a security system. I changed my locks, and I started carrying pepper spray. I never saw Liam again. I don't know where he is or what he's doing, but I still think about him sometimes, and I still get chills when I remember what happened. The experience taught me a lot about the dangers of online dating, about the importance of trusting my instincts, and about the resilience of the human spirit. It also taught me that sometimes the scariest monsters are the ones that hide in plain sight, the ones that lure you in with their charm and intelligence, the ones that make you believe they're someone they're not. I'm still wary of dating apps, and I'm still hesitant to trust people, but I refuse to let fear control my life. I'm determined to move forward, to find love and happiness, even if it means taking a few risks along the way. And that is something I will never stop believing in. Okay, so I'm not usually one to share super personal stuff, especially when it borders on the downright terrifying. But this still messes with me, even years later. And honestly, maybe getting it out there will finally help me process it, you know? It all started, predictably, on Hinge. I was in my late 20s, fresh out of a messy breakup, and just dipping my toes back into the dating pool. Hinge felt safer than Tinder, more curated, less random. You know, designed to be deleted, and all that jazz. I was looking for something real, or at least the potential for something real. Anyway, I matched with this guy, Liam. His profile was different. Not in a bad way, exactly. He wasn't conventionally handsome, kind of lanky, with messy brown hair and these intense, almost piercing blue eyes. But his prompts were thoughtful, a little quirky. He listed his biggest irrational fear as mannequins and said he was looking for someone who can make me laugh until my stomach hurts. I liked his vibe. We started chatting, and the conversation flowed easily. He was smart, funny, and genuinely seemed interested in getting to know me. We talked about everything, our families, our jobs, our hopes and dreams. Cliché, I know, but it felt real. We both loved old movies, hiking, and trying new restaurants. After a week or so of nonstop texting, we decided to meet up. He suggested this small, independent bookstore cafe near my apartment. It was a cozy place, filled with mismatched furniture and the smell of coffee and old paper. Perfect for a first date. When I saw him, he was even more striking in person. Those blue eyes were even more intense, and he had this nervous energy that I found strangely endearing. The date was amazing. We talked for hours, completely lost track of time. We laughed, we debated, we shared stories. It felt like we'd known each other forever. At the end of the night, he walked me home, and we had this awkward but sweet goodbye kiss on my doorstep. I went inside with that fluttery feeling in my stomach, convinced that I'd finally met someone special. We kept seeing each other, 2-3 times a week. Each date was better than the last. We went to museums, concerts, comedy shows. We cooked dinner at my place, went for long walks in the park, and spent hours just talking. I was falling hard, and I thought he was too. He was attentive, caring, and always made me feel like I was the only girl in the world. But then, things started to get weird. Subtle at first, almost imperceptible. He started asking me strange questions about my childhood, about my deepest fears, about things I'd never told anyone. He seemed fascinated by the darker aspects of my personality, the things I usually tried to hide. He was especially interested in my dreams. He'd ask me to describe them in vivid detail, probing for hidden meanings and symbolism. I chalked it up to him being a bit of an eccentric intellectual, someone who was genuinely curious about the human psyche. But it still made me a little uneasy. Then there were the gifts. He started giving me these unusual presents. An antique music box that played a haunting melody. A vintage photograph of a woman with piercing eyes, which he claimed reminded him of me. A dried flower arrangement that smelled faintly of decay. They weren't expensive, but they were unsettling. They felt off. I tried to tell myself I was overreacting, that he was just trying to be romantic in his own unique way. But the feeling of unease kept growing. And then the stalking started. I didn't realize it at first. It was just small things. Seeing him in places I didn't expect him to be. Walking past my apartment building when he knew I was at work. Showing up at my favorite coffee shop at the exact same time as me, even though I hadn't told him I was going. I thought it was just coincidence. Or maybe he was just trying to surprise me. But then it became more frequent, more deliberate. He started mentioning things he couldn't possibly have known. Details about my daily routine, conversations I'd had with my friends, things I'd only posted on social media. It was like he was watching me, all the time. I confronted him about it, and he denied everything. He said I was being paranoid, that I was imagining things. He turned it around on me, accused me of being insecure and distrustful. I wanted to believe him, but I couldn't shake the feeling that he was lying. I started to feel trapped, suffocated. I knew I had to end things, but I was scared. I was afraid of what he might do. One night, I was walking home from work when I noticed him standing across the street, watching me. He didn't say anything, didn't make a move. He just stood there, staring at me with those intense blue eyes. It was the most terrifying thing I'd ever experienced. I ran home, locked all the doors and windows, and called my best friend, Sarah. I told her everything, sobbing uncontrollably. She convinced me to go to the police. I went to the station the next day and filed a report. I told them about the stalking, the strange gifts, the unsettling questions. They took me seriously, but they said there wasn't much they could do without concrete evidence. They advised me to get a restraining order and to be extra careful. That night, I stayed at Sarah's apartment. I couldn't bear to be alone in my own place. I barely slept, tossing and turning all night, haunted by Liam's face. The next morning, I went back to my apartment to pack some clothes and get a few things. As soon as I opened the door, I knew something was wrong. The air was heavy still. My apartment was usually really bright, but it felt dim. It took me a few seconds to realize someone had been inside. My furniture had been rearranged, my books were stacked in odd patterns, and my photographs were turned upside down. And then I saw it. Scrawled on my bedroom mirror in bright red lipstick was a single word: mine. I screamed. I ran out of the apartment and didn't stop running until I reached Sarah's place. I never went back to that apartment. I broke my lease and moved in with Sarah. I got a restraining order against Liam, but it didn't make me feel any safer. I was constantly looking over my shoulder, afraid that he was watching me. A few weeks later, I got a call from the police. They'd found Liam's apartment. It was filled with photos of me, hundreds of them, plastered all over the walls. There were also newspaper clippings about me, articles about my family, and printouts of my social media profiles. It was like a shrine, a testament to his obsession. They also found a journal filled with his writings. It was disturbing, to say the least. He wrote about how he was destined to be with me, how I was his soulmate, how he would do anything to protect me. He also wrote about his plans for us, our future together. It was clear that he was completely delusional, and that he believed we were in a relationship, even though I had broken up with him. The police arrested him, and he was charged with stalking and harassment. He pleaded guilty and was sentenced to several years in prison. I thought that was the end of it, that I could finally move on with my life. But I was wrong. Even behind bars, he found ways to torment me. He sent me letters, rambling, incoherent messages filled with love and hate. He called me from prison, begging me to forgive him. I changed my number, blocked his calls, and tried to ignore him. But he was always there, lurking in the back of my mind. He's out now. He was released a few months ago. I don't know where he is, what he's doing, but I know he's out there. And I'm still afraid. I still have nightmares. I still jump at every shadow. This is why I have a hard time with Hinge, and why I'm so reluctant to date. I can't shake the feeling that he's watching me, waiting for the right moment to strike. I know it sounds crazy, but I can't help it. This is my Hinge horror story. This is my reality. A reality I can't shake. What started as a normal day doom scrolling on Hinge turned into a multi-layered head trip I'm still unpacking. You know how it is. Swiping through the same recycled prompts, the same hiking pics, the same guys holding fish. It all blurs together after a while. I wasn't really looking for anything serious, just a distraction. Maybe a funny conversation to break up the monotony of working from home. Then I saw him. His profile was different. Not in a "this guy is a serial killer" kind of way, but in a way that made me stop scrolling and actually read. His name was Alistair, and his pictures weren't the typical pose shots. They were candid, almost voyeuristic. One was a blurry photo of him on a crowded subway, another of him reading a book in a dimly lit cafe. He had this intense, almost haunted look in his eyes that was strangely captivating. His prompts were even more intriguing. One said, "The most unsettling thing I know is that we're all just narrating our lives to ourselves," and another was, "Looking for someone to discuss the nature of reality with overpriced coffee." I know. It sounds pretentious as hell, but I was drawn to it. I'm a sucker for philosophical conversations and anything that challenges my perception of the world. So I swiped right. To my surprise, we matched instantly. He messaged me almost immediately, not with a generic "hey," but with a quote from Philip K. Dick. It was on. Our conversations were unlike anything I'd ever experienced on a dating app. We talked about everything from existentialism to string theory to the simulation hypothesis. He was incredibly intelligent, articulate, and had this way of making me question everything I thought I knew. He never asked the typical dating app questions, like what I did for a living or what my hobbies were. He wanted to know what I believed, what scared me, what made me feel truly alive. After a week of intense online conversation, he suggested we meet in person. He proposed a walk through this old cemetery on the outskirts of town, which, okay, maybe wasn't the most romantic setting, but it felt fitting given our conversations. I agreed, telling myself it was just a date, nothing to get worked up about. But I couldn't shake this feeling that something unusual was about to happen. The day of the date, the weather was perfect, crisp autumn air, golden sunlight filtering through the trees. I met Alistair at the entrance to the cemetery. He looked even more striking in person, tall with dark, piercing eyes and an almost otherworldly aura. He greeted me with a polite nod and a knowing smile, like he already knew everything about me. We started walking through the cemetery, the silence broken only by the crunching of leaves under our feet. The atmosphere was definitely eerie, with ancient tombstones looming in the shadows, but I found it strangely peaceful. Alistair started talking about the history of the cemetery, pointing out the graves of notable figures and sharing morbid anecdotes. He had this encyclopedic knowledge of everything, which was both impressive and a little unsettling. Then, he started talking about something else entirely. He started talking about the nature of time, about how the past, present, and future were all happening simultaneously, and how we were all just experiencing a linear slice of reality. He said that certain places, like this cemetery, were thin spots where the veil between dimensions was weaker. I listened intently, trying to follow his train of thought. I'm open-minded, but this was starting to sound a bit out there. As we walked deeper into the cemetery, the air grew colder, and the shadows seemed to lengthen. I started to feel a sense of unease, like we were being watched. Alistair stopped in front of a particularly old and ornate tombstone. He turned to me, his eyes gleaming with an almost feverish intensity. "Do you feel it?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Feel what?" I replied, my heart starting to race. "The shift," he said, "the thinning of the veil." Suddenly, the ground started to tremble. The trees swayed violently, and the air crackled with energy. I felt a surge of dizziness and nausea. I looked around, and the cemetery seemed to be changing. The tombstones were shifting, the shadows were twisting, and the air was filled with a low, guttural hum. I grabbed Alistair's arm, my grip tightening in panic. "What's happening?" I cried. He just smiled, a strange, unsettling smile. "We're breaking through," he said. "We're seeing the truth." And then, everything went black. I don't know how long I was unconscious. When I came to, I was lying on the ground, the cemetery silent and still. The sun was setting, casting long, eerie shadows across the tombstones. Alistair was gone. I sat up, my head throbbing, trying to piece together what had just happened. Had it all been a hallucination? A dream? Or had I actually experienced something otherworldly? I stood up, my legs shaky, and started walking back towards the entrance of the cemetery. As I walked, I noticed something strange. The tombstones were different. They were in different places, with different names and dates. It was like the entire cemetery had been rearranged. I pulled out my phone, intending to call an Uber, but it was dead. I tried to remember the way back to the entrance, but I was completely disoriented. I wandered through the cemetery for what felt like hours, lost and alone, the shadows closing in around me. Finally, I stumbled upon a familiar landmark, a large, gnarled oak tree that I remembered seeing earlier. I followed the path leading away from the tree, and eventually, I reached the entrance of the cemetery. I walked out onto the road, gasping for air, and flagged down a passing car. The driver looked at me with concern. "Are you okay?" he asked. "You look like you've seen a ghost." I didn't say anything, just gave him my address, and slumped back in my seat. When I got home, I collapsed on my bed, exhausted and terrified. I spent the next few days trying to make sense of what had happened. I searched for Alistair online, but he was nowhere to be found. His Hinge profile had disappeared, and there was no trace of him on any other social media platform. It was like he had never existed. I started to question my own sanity. Had I imagined the whole thing? Had I just had some kind of psychotic break? But then, a week later, I received a package in the mail. It was a small, unmarked box. I opened it cautiously, my hands trembling. Inside, there was a single object, a small, antique key. There was no note, no return address, just the key. I stared at it, my mind racing. Where did it come from? What did it unlock? I had no idea, but I had a feeling it was connected to Alistair, to the cemetery, to the strange and unsettling experience I couldn't forget. I still have the key. I keep it hidden away in a drawer, a constant reminder of that day. Sometimes, I think about going back to the cemetery, trying to find the lock that the key opens, but I'm also afraid of what I might find. Some doors are better left unopened, and sometimes, the most unsettling thing you can find on a dating app is not a bad date, but a glimpse into a reality you were never meant to see. That Hinge match shifted something in me. I haven't been on a dating app since. I'm better off not going on it. What started out as something innocent turned into a nightmare. Okay, here goes. This is about Hinge, and it's still messing with me. Try to figure out what the hell even happened. It's not a dramatic, slasher movie kind of horror story. It's more of a slow burn, psychological kind of thing that makes you question your own sanity. So, I was back on Hinge last fall. I'd been off and on dating apps for years. You know the drill. Sometimes you meet cool people. Sometimes it's a total bust. I wasn't looking for anything serious, just someone to grab dinner with, maybe catch a movie. Basically, avoid spending another winter alone with my cat. I matched with this guy, Liam. His profile was different. Not in a bad way, just specific. His photos weren't the typical gym selfies or group shots with friends. They were mostly landscapes, blurry sunsets, empty city streets at night, a single tree silhouetted against a gray sky. He had one photo of himself, but it was taken from behind, standing on a pier looking out at the ocean. Artistic, I guess. His prompts were even more unusual. One asked, "What's a secret you've never told anyone?" And his answer was simply, "I see things others don't." Another said, "My greatest fear is," and he wrote, "forgetting." It was all very enigmatic, bordering on pretentious, but something about it intrigued me. I figured he was either a tortured artist type or a complete weirdo. Either way, it was more interesting than the endless stream of guys holding fish they'd caught. We started chatting, and the conversations were intense. He didn't do small talk. He wanted to know about my deepest fears, my regrets, my dreams. He asked about my childhood, my relationship with my parents, moments in my life that had shaped me. It felt like a therapy session disguised as a dating app conversation. I usually hate that kind of forced vulnerability, but with Liam, it felt different. He was a good listener, asked thoughtful questions, and seemed genuinely interested in what I had to say. We talked for a couple of weeks before deciding to meet up. He suggested a small, independent bookstore downtown. It seemed like a fitting choice, given his profile and our conversations. I actually felt excited, which was rare for me when it came to first dates. The bookstore was dimly lit and filled with the smell of old paper. Liam was already there when I arrived, standing near the poetry section. He looked exactly like his photo, tall, slender, with dark hair and a quiet intensity about him. He was wearing a long, black coat that seemed a little out of place for the weather, but it suited him. The date started off well. We talked about books, movies, art, all the things we discussed online. He was intelligent and articulate, and he had a dry sense of humor that I found surprisingly charming. We wandered through the bookstore, browsing the shelves, occasionally stopping to discuss a particular book or author. But then things started to get strange. He started asking me about my memories, not in a general way, but very specific details. He asked about a time I got lost in the woods as a child, a specific birthday party I had when I was 8, a dream I had described to him in one of our chats. It was like he was trying to jog my memory, but it felt invasive. Then he started saying things that made no sense. He said, "Do you remember the woman in the red dress?" I was confused. "What woman in the red dress?" I asked. He just stared at me, his eyes intense. "You know," he said, "the one who was always watching you." I laughed nervously. "I have no idea what you're talking about." He kept asking these kinds of questions, dropping cryptic hints about things I couldn't remember. He mentioned a hidden room in my childhood home, a secret message I had received from a stranger, a recurring nightmare I had as a teenager. It was like he knew things about my life that I had completely forgotten, or that had never even happened. I started to feel disoriented, like I was losing my grip on reality. Was he messing with me? Was this some kind of weird psychological game? Or was I actually forgetting things? The more he talked, the more confused I became. My head started to ache, and I felt a growing sense of unease. I wanted to leave, but I was also strangely fascinated. It was like I was trapped in a bizarre dream, unable to wake up. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. "I think I need to go," I said, my voice trembling. He didn't try to stop me. He just looked at me with a sad, knowing expression. "You can't escape your memories," he said softly. I practically ran out of the bookstore and hailed a cab. As I drove away, I looked back and saw him standing in the doorway, watching me. He didn't wave or smile. He just stood there, a dark figure silhouetted against the light. I went home and tried to make sense of what had happened. I replayed the date in my mind, trying to find a logical explanation for his strange behavior. Was he a con artist trying to manipulate me? Was he mentally ill? Or was there something else going on? Something I couldn't understand? The next day, I did some research on Liam. I searched his name online, but nothing came up. I tried reverse image searching his photos, but they didn't lead anywhere. It was like he didn't exist outside of Hinge. Then I started to question my own memories. Had I actually forgotten things? Were there gaps in my past that I wasn't aware of? I spent hours poring over old photo albums, trying to piece together my childhood. I called my parents and asked them about the things Liam had mentioned: the hidden room, the secret message, the recurring nightmare. They looked at me like I was crazy. "Honey, you're not making any sense," my mother said. "There was no hidden room in our house. You never received any secret message, and you've never had any recurring nightmares." I felt a chill run down my spine. Was Liam right? Was I forgetting things? Or was he simply making things up, planting false memories in my mind? I decided to delete Hinge and try to forget about the whole thing. But the feeling of unease lingered. I couldn't shake the sense that I was being watched, that someone knew things about me that I didn't even know myself. A few weeks later, I started having strange dreams. They were vivid and unsettling, filled with images of dark forests, abandoned houses, and shadowy figures. In one dream, I saw the woman in the red dress that Liam had mentioned. She was standing in the corner of my bedroom, watching me sleep. I woke up in a cold sweat, my heart pounding. I couldn't shake the feeling that the dreams were real, that they were memories trying to surface. I don't know what's going on. I don't know if Liam was a con artist, a stalker, or something else entirely. I don't know if I'm losing my mind, or if I'm actually remembering things I had forgotten. All I know is that I'm scared. I'm scared of what I might find if I dig too deep into my past. I'm scared of what I might be forgetting. And I'm scared of the man I met on Hinge, the man who seemed to know more about me than I knew about myself. I still see his picture in my head sometimes. That blurry photo of him standing on the pier, looking out at the ocean. I wonder what he's seeing, what he's remembering. And I wonder if he's still watching me, waiting for me to remember too. This whole experience has just left me unsettled. I haven't been back on any dating app since. Maybe I'm just not cut out for it. Or maybe there's some things you're better off forgetting. So let me set the stage. I was freshly single, maybe a little too eager to jump back into the dating pool. All my friends were raving about Hinge, saying it was the app for serious relationships, which, at the time, sounded exactly like what I wanted. I was tired of the endless swiping and shallow conversations of Tinder. I wanted someone who actually, read my profile. Big mistake. Huge. I created my profile, carefully curated my photos, and answered the prompts with what I thought was a perfect blend of wit and vulnerability. I even sprung for the premium membership because, in my naive optimism, I was convinced it would help me find the one faster. I started matching with a few guys, had some decent conversations, and even went on a couple of okay dates. Nothing spectacular, but nothing terrible either. Then came Liam. Liam's profile was different. He was attractive, in a brooding, artistic sort of way. His photos were mostly black and white, close-ups of his face or shots of him looking pensively into the distance. His prompts were all about deep, philosophical stuff. The meaning of life, the nature of reality, that kind of thing. It was pretentious, sure, but also intriguing. I swiped right, and we matched instantly. Our conversations were intense from the start. He didn't do small talk. He wanted to know my deepest fears, my biggest regrets, my childhood traumas. He seemed genuinely interested in understanding me on a profound level. It was intoxicating, to be honest. After a week of nonstop texting, we decided to meet up. He suggested a secluded coffee shop in a part of town I wasn't super familiar with. It should have been a red flag, but I was so caught up in the intensity of our connection that I ignored it. The coffee shop was dimly lit and practically empty. Liam was already there, sitting in a corner booth, wearing a long, dark coat and a fedora. I know, fedora. But somehow he made it work. He was even more attractive in person, with piercing blue eyes that seemed to see right through me. The conversation flowed easily. We talked for hours about everything and nothing. He was charming, intelligent, and incredibly attentive. He listened intently to everything I said, nodding and making thoughtful comments. I left that date feeling like I had finally met someone who truly understood me. That's when things started to get weird. Over the next few weeks, Liam became increasingly possessive. He wanted to know where I was at all times, who I was with, and what I was doing. He would text me constantly, and if I didn't respond immediately, he would get angry. He started showing up unannounced at my apartment, claiming he just wanted to surprise me. He even started calling me by pet names that I hadn't approved of, like my precious and my muse. It was suffocating. I tried to pull back, to create some distance, but he wouldn't let me. He would guilt-trip me, telling me that I was hurting him, that I was the only person who had ever truly understood him. He even threatened to harm himself if I left him. I was trapped. One night, I was at home, trying to watch a movie, when I heard a knock at the door. It was Liam. I hesitated to open it, but I knew he wouldn't go away. I opened the door, and he barged in, his eyes wild. He was holding a bouquet of roses, but they were all dead and withered. "I brought you these," he said, his voice trembling. "They remind me of our love. Beautiful, but ultimately doomed." I was terrified. I told him he needed to leave, that I couldn't do this anymore. He refused. He grabbed my arm, his grip tight. "You can't leave me," he said, his voice rising. "You're mine. You belong to me." I tried to pull away, but he wouldn't let go. He started ranting about how I was the only person who had ever understood him, how I was his soulmate, how we were meant to be together forever. I was screaming and crying, trying to get him to release me. Suddenly, he stopped talking. He looked down at my arm, where his grip had left a red mark. His expression changed from anger to remorse. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I didn't mean to hurt you." He let go of my arm and backed away. "I'll go," he said, "but I'll be watching you. Always." He turned and walked out the door, leaving me shaken and terrified. I immediately called the police and reported the incident. They took a statement and told me they would keep an eye on him. I spent the rest of the night at a friend's house, too scared to go back to my apartment. The next day, I packed up my belongings and moved to a different city. I changed my phone number, deleted my social media accounts, and blocked Liam on Hinge. I haven't seen or heard from him since, but I still live in fear that he'll find me. The experience completely shattered my trust in online dating. I haven't been on Hinge or any other dating app since. I'm too afraid of running into another Liam. The whole thing felt like a real-life horror movie. Now I know better than to trust that Hinge is the app for serious relationships.